Cultural Exchange by Keith Laumer. Narrated by William Skye. It was a simple student exchange, but Retief gave them more of an education than they expected. Part 1. Second Secretary Magnan took his green-lined cape and orange-feathered beret from the clothes tree. "I'm off now, Retief," he said. "I hope you'll manage the administrative routine during my absence without any unfortunate incidents." "That seems a modest enough hope," Retief said. "I'll try to live up to it." "I don't appreciate frivolity with reference to this division," Magnan said testily. "When I first came here, the Manpower Utilization Directorate, Division of Libraries and Education, was a shambles. I fancy I've made muddle what it is today. Frankly, I question the wisdom of placing you in charge of such a sensitive desk, even for 2 weeks. But remember, yours is purely a rubber stamp function." "In that case, let's leave it to Miss Ferkel. I'll take a couple of weeks off myself. With her poundage, she could bring plenty of pressure to bear." "I assume you jest, Retief," Magnan said sadly. "I should expect even you to appreciate that Bogan participation in the exchange program may be the first step towards sublimation of their aggressions into more cultivated channels." "I see they're sending 2,000 students to Deland," Retief said, glancing at the memo for record. "That's a sizable sublimation." Magnan nodded. "The Bogans have launched no less than 4 military campaigns in the last 2 decades. They're known as the hoodlums of the Nicodemean cluster. Now, perhaps we shall see them breaking that precedent and entering into the cultural life of the galaxy." "Breaking and entering," Retief said. "You may have something there. But I'm wondering what they'll study on Deland. That's an industrial world of the poor but honest variety." "Academic details are the affair of the students and their professors," Magnan said. "Our function is merely to bring them together. See that you don't antagonize the Bogan representative. This will be an excellent opportunity for you to practice your diplomatic restraint. Not your strong point, I'm sure you'll agree." A buzzer sounded. Retief punched a button. "What is it, Miss Ferkel?" "That bucolic person from Lovenbroy is here again." On the small desk screen, Miss Ferkel's meaty features were compressed in disapproval. "This fellow's a confounded pest. I'll leave him to you, Retief," Magnan said. "Tell him something, get rid of him. And remember, here at Core HQ, all eyes are upon you." "If I'd have thought of that, I'd have worn my other suit," Retief said. Magnan snorted and passed from view. Retief punched Miss Ferkel's button. "Send the bucolic person in." A tall, broad man with bronze skin and grey hair, wearing tight trousers of heavy cloth, a loose shirt open at the neck and a short jacket, stepped into the room. He had a bundle under his arm. He paused at sight of Retief, looked him over momentarily, then advanced and held out his hand. Retief took it. For a moment the two big men stood face to face. The newcomer's jaw muscles knotted. Then he winced. Retief dropped his hand and motioned to a chair. "That's nice knuckle work, mister," the stranger said, massaging his hand. "First time anybody ever did that to me. My fault, though. I started it, I guess." He grinned and sat down. "What can I do for you?" Retief said. "You work for this culture bunch, do you? Funny. I thought they were all ribbon counter boys. Never mind. I'm Hank Arapoulos. I'm a farmer. What I wanted to see you about was..." He shifted in his chair. "Well, out on Lovenbroy we've got a serious problem. The wine crop is just about ready. We start picking in another 2-3 months. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the Bacchus vines we grow." "No," Retief said. "Have a cigar?" He pushed a box across the desk. Arapoulos took one. "Bacchus vines are an unusual crop," he said, puffing the cigar alight. "Only mature every 12 years. In between, the vines don't need a lot of attention, so our time's mostly our own. We like to farm, though. Spend a lot of time developing new forms. Apples the size of a melon and sweet. Sounds very pleasant," Retief said. "Where does the Libraries and Education Division come in?" Arapoulos leaned forward. "We go in pretty heavy for the arts. Folks can't spend all their time hybridizing plants. We've turned all the land area we've got into parks and farms. Of course, we left some sizable forest areas for hunting and such. Lovenbroy's a nice place, Mr. Retief." "It sounds like it, Mr. Arapoulos. Just what?" "Call me Hank. We've got long seasons back home, 5 of them. Our year's about 18 Terry months. Cold as hell in winter, eccentric orbit, you know. Blue-black sky, stars visible all day. We do mostly painting and sculpture in the winter. Then spring, still plenty cold. Lots of skiing, bobsledding, ice skating, and it's the season for woodworkers. Our furniture..." "I've seen some of your furniture," Retief said. "Beautiful work." Arapoulos nodded. "All local timbers, too. Lots of metals in our soil, and those sulfates give the wood some colour, I'll tell you. Then comes the monsoon. Rain, it comes down in sheets. But the sun's getting closer, shines all the time. Ever seen it pouring rain in the sunshine? That's the music writing season. Then summer. Summer's hot. We stay inside in the daytime and have beach parties all night. Lots of beach on Lovenbroy. We're mostly islands. That's the drama and symphony time. The theatres are set up on the sand or anchored offshore. You have the music and the surf and the bonfires and stars. We're close to the centre of a globular cluster, you know. You say it's time now for the wine crop? That's right. Autumn's our harvest season. Most years we just have the ordinary crops. Fruit, grain, that kind of thing. Getting it in doesn't take long. We spend most of the time on architecture, getting new places ready for the winter or remodelling the older ones. We spend a lot of time in our houses. We like to have them comfortable. But this year's different. This is wine year. Arapoulos puffed on his cigar, looked worriedly at Retief. Our wine crop is our big money crop, he said. We make enough to keep us going. But this year, the crop isn't panning out? Oh, the crop's fine. One of the best I can remember. Of course, I'm only 28. I can't remember but 2 other harvests. The problem's not the crop. Have you lost your markets? That sounds like a matter for the commercial. Lost our markets? Mister, nobody that ever tasted our wines ever settled for anything else. It sounds like I've been missing something, said Retief. I'll have to try them sometime. Arapoulos put his bundle on the desk, pulled off the wrappings. No time like the present, he said. Retief looked at the 2 squat bottles, one green, one amber, both dusty with faded labels and blackened corks secured by wire. Drinking on duty is frowned on in the Corps, Mr. Arapoulos, he said. This isn't drinking. It's just wine. Arapoulos pulled the wire retainer loose, thumbed the cork. It rose slowly, then popped in the air. Arapoulos caught it. Aromatic fumes wafted from the bottle. Besides, my feelings would be hurt if you didn't join me. He winked. Retief took 2 thin-walled glasses from a table beside the desk. Come to think of it, we also have to be careful about violating quaint native customs. Arapoulos filled the glasses. Retief picked one up, sniffed the deep rust-coloured fluid, tasted it, then took a healthy swallow. He looked at Arapoulos thoughtfully. It tastes like salted pecans, with an undercurrent of crusted port. Don't try to describe it, Mr. Retief, Arapoulos said. He took a mouthful of wine, swished it around his teeth, swallowed. It's Bacchus wine, that's all. Nothing like it in the galaxy. He pushed the second bottle toward Retief. The custom back home is to alternate red wine and black. Retief put aside his cigar, pulled the wires loose, nudged the cork, caught it as it popped up. Bad luck if you missed the cork, Arapoulos said, nodding. You probably never heard about the trouble we had on Lovenbroy a few years back. Can't say that I did, Hank. Retief poured the black wine into 2 fresh glasses. Here's to the harvest. We've got plenty of minerals on Lovenbroy, Arapoulos said, swallowing wine, but we don't plan to wreck the landscape mining 'em. We like to farm. About 10 years back, some neighbours of ours landed a force. They figured they knew better what to do with our minerals than we did. Wanted to strip mine, smelt ore. We convinced them otherwise, but it took a year, and we lost a lot of men. That's too bad, Retief said. I'd say this one tastes more like roast beef and popcorn over a Riesling base. It put us in a bad spot, Arapoulos went on. We had to borrow money from a world called Crony, mortgaged our crops. Had to start exporting artwork too. Plenty of buyers, but it's not the same when you're doing it for strangers. Say, this business of alternating drinks is the real McCoy, Retief said. What's the problem? Crony about to foreclose? Well, the loan's due. The wine crop would put us in the clear, but we need harvest hands. Picking Bacchus grapes isn't a job you can turn over to machinery, and anyway, we wouldn't if we could. Vintage season is the high point of living on Lovenbroy. Everybody joins in. First there's the picking in the fields, miles and miles of vineyards covering the mountainsides and crowding the riverbanks with gardens here and there. Big vines 8 feet high loaded with fruit and deep grass growing between. The wine carriers keep on the run, bringing wine to the pickers. There's prizes for the biggest day's output, bets on who can fill the most baskets in an hour. The sun's high and bright and it's just cool enough to give you plenty of energy. Come nightfall, the tables are set up in the garden plots and the feast is laid on. Roast turkeys, beef, hams, all kinds of fowl. Big salads, plenty of fruit, fresh baked bread, and wine, plenty of wine. The cooking's done by a different crew each night in each garden, and there's prizes for the best crews. Then the wine making. We still tramp out the vintage. That's mostly for the young folks, but anybody's welcome. That's when things start to get loosened up. Matter of fact, pretty near half our young'uns are born after a vintage. All bets are off then. It keeps a fellow on his toes, though. Ever tried to hold on to a gal wearing nothing but a layer of grape juice? Never did, Retief said. You say most of the children are born after a vintage. That would make them only 12 years old by the time. Oh, that's Lovenbroy years. They'd be 18, Terry reckoning. I was thinking you looked a little mature for 28, Retief said. 42 Terry years, Arapoulos said. But this year it looks bad. We've got a bumper crop and we're short-handed. If we don't get a big vintage, Crony steps in. Lord knows what they'll do to the land. Then next vintage time, with them holding half our grape acreage. You hopped the vineyards. Yep, pretty dumb, huh? But we figured 12 years was a long time. On the whole, Retief said, I think I prefer the black, but the red is hard to beat. What we figured was maybe you culture boys could help us out, a loan to see us through the vintage, enough to hire extra hands. Then we'd repay it in sculpture, painting, furniture. Sorry, Hank, all we do here is work out itineraries for travelling sideshows, that kind of thing. Now, if you needed a troupe of Groaki nose flute players, can they pick grapes? Nope. Anyway, they can't stand the daylight. Have you talked this over with the Labour Office? Sure did. They said they'd fix us up with all the electronic specialists and computer programmers we wanted, but no field hands. Said it was what they classified as menial drudgery. You'd have thought I was trying to buy slaves. The buzzer sounded. Miss Ferkel's features appeared on the desk screen. You're due at the Intergroup Council in 5 minutes, she said. Then afterwards there are the Bogan students to meet. Thanks. Retief finished his glass, stood. I have to run, Hank, he said. Let me think this over. Maybe I can come up with something. Check with me day after tomorrow. And you better leave the bottles here. Cultural exhibits, you know. Part 2. As the council meeting broke up, Retief caught the eye of a colleague across the table. Mr. Waffle, you mentioned a shipment going to a place called Crony. What are they getting? Waffle blinked. You're the fellow who's filling in for Magnan over at Muddle, he said. Properly speaking, equipment grants are the sole concern of the Motorised Equipment Depot, Division of Loans and Exchanges. He pursed his lips. However, I suppose there's no harm in telling you. They'll be receiving heavy mining equipment. Drill rigs, that sort of thing? Strip mining gear. Waffle took a slip of paper from a breast pocket, blinked at it. Bolo model WV1 tractors, to be specific. Why is Muddle interested in Medal's activities? Forgive my curiosity, Mr. Waffle. It's just that Crony cropped up earlier today. It seems she holds a mortgage on some vineyards over on... That's not Medal's affair, sir, Waffle cut in. I have sufficient problems as chief of Medal without probing into Muddle's business. Speaking of tractors, another man put in, we over at the Special Committee for Rehabilitation and Overhaul of Underdeveloped Nations' General Economies have been trying for months to get a request for mining equipment for Deland through Medal. Scrounge was late on the scene, Waffle said. First come, first served. That's our policy at Medal. Good day, gentlemen. He strode off, briefcase under his arm. That's the trouble with peaceful worlds, the Scrounge committee man said. Bogue is a troublemaker, so every agency in the Corps is out to pacify her, while my chance to make a record, that is assist peace-loving Deland, comes to naught. He shook his head. What kind of university do they have on Deland? Asked Retief. We're sending them 2,000 exchange students. It must be quite an institution. University? Deland has one under-endowed technical college. Will all the exchange students be studying at the technical college? 2,000 students? Ha! 200 students would overtax the facilities of the college. I wonder if the Bogans know that. The Bogans? Why, most of Deland's difficulties are due to the unwise trade agreement she entered into with Bogue. 2,000 students indeed, he snorted and walked away. Retief stopped by the office to pick up a short cape, then rode the elevator to the roof of the 230-storey Corps HQ building and hailed a cab to the port. The Bogan students had arrived early. Retief saw them lined up on the ramp waiting to go through customs. It would be half an hour before they were cleared through. He turned into the bar and ordered a beer. A tall young fellow on the next stall raised his glass. Happy days, he said. And nights to match. You said it. He gulped half his beer. My name's Karsh. Mr. Karsh. Yep, Mr. Karsh. Boy, this is a drag sitting around this place waiting. You meeting somebody? Yeah, bunch of babies, kids. How they expect... Never mind. Have one on me. Thanks. You a scoutmaster? I'll tell you what I am. I'm a cradle robber. You know, he turned to Retief, not one of those kids is over 18. He hiccuped. Students, you know. Never saw a student with a beard, did you? Lots of times. You're meeting the students, are you? The young fellow blinked at Retief. Oh, you know about it, huh? I represent Muddle. Karsh finished his beer, ordered another. I came on ahead. Sort of an advance guard for the kids. I trained them myself. Treated it like a game, but they can handle a CSU. Don't know how they'll act under pressure. If I had my old platoon... He looked at his beer glass, pushed it back. Had enough, he said. So long, friend. Or are you coming along? Retief nodded. Might as well. At the exit to the customs enclosure, Retief watched as the first of the Bogan students came through, caught sight of Karsh and snapped to attention, his chest out. Drop that, mister, Karsh snapped. Is that any way for a student to act? The youth, a round-faced lad with broad shoulders, grinned. Heck no, he said. Say, Mr. Karsh, are we going to go to town? We fellows were thinking. You are, huh? You act like a bunch of school kids. I mean, no. Now line up. We have quarters ready for the students, Retief said. If you'd like to bring them around to the west side, I have a couple of copters laid on. Thanks, said Karsh. They'll stay here until take-off time. Can't have the little dears wandering around loose. Might get ideas about going over the hill. He hiccuped. I mean, they might play hooky. We've scheduled your re-embarkation for noon tomorrow. That's a long wait. Muddles arranged theatre tickets and a dinner. Sorry, Karsh said. As soon as the baggage gets here, we're off. He hiccuped again. Can't travel without our baggage, you know. Suit yourself, Retief said. Where's the baggage now? Coming in aboard a crony lighter. Maybe you'd like to arrange for a meal for the students here. Sure, Karsh said. That's a good idea. Why don't you join us? Karsh winked. And bring a few beers. Not this time, Retief said. He watched the students still emerging from customs. They seem to be all boys, he commented. No female students? Maybe later, Karsh said. You know, after we see how the first bunch is received. Back at the Muddle office, Retief buzzed Miss Ferkel. Do you know the name of the institution these Bogan students are bound for? Why, the University of Deland, of course. Would that be the technical college? Miss Ferkel's mouth puckered. I'm sure I've never pried into these details. Where does doing your job stop and prying begin, Miss Ferkel? Retief said. Personally, I'm curious as to just what it is these students are travelling so far to study, at core expense. Mr. Magnan never. For the present, Miss Ferkel, Mr. Magnan is vacationing. That leaves me with the question of 2,000 young male students headed for a world with no classrooms for them, a world in need of tractors. But the tractors are on their way to Crony, a world under obligation to Bogue. And Crony holds a mortgage on the best grape acreage on Lovenbroy. Well, Miss Ferkel snapped, small eyes glaring under unplucked brows. I hope you're not questioning Mr. Magnan's wisdom. About Mr. Magnan's wisdom there can be no question, Retief said. But never mind. I'd like you to look up an item for me. How many tractors will Crony be getting under the medal programme? Why, that's entirely medal business, Miss Ferkel said. Mr. Magnan always... I'm sure he did. Let me know about the tractors as soon as you can. Miss Ferkel sniffed and disappeared from the screen. Retief left the office, descended 41 stories, followed a corridor to the core library. In the stacks he thumbed through catalogues, pored over indices. Can I help you? Someone chirped. A tiny librarian stood at his elbow. Thank you, ma'am, Retief said. I'm looking for information on a mining rig, a Bolo Model WV tractor. You won't find it in the industrial section, the librarian said. Come along. Retief followed her along the stacks to a well-lit section lettered Armaments. She took a tape from the shelf, plugged it into the viewer, flipped through and stopped at a squat armoured vehicle. That's the Model WV, she said. It's what is known as a Continental Siege Unit. It carries 4 men with a 0.5 megaton per second firepower. There must be an error somewhere, Retief said. The Bolo model I want is a tractor. Model WV M1. Oh, the modification was the addition of a bulldozer blade for demolition work. That must be what confused you. Probably, among other things. Thank you. Miss Ferkel was waiting at the office. I have the information you wanted, she said. I've had it for over 10 minutes. I was under the impression you needed it urgently, and I went to great lengths. Sure, Retief said. Shoot, how many tractors? 500. Are you sure? Miss Ferkel's chins quivered. Well, if you feel I'm incompetent, just questioning the possibility of a mistake, Miss Ferkel. 500 tractors is a lot of equipment. Was there anything further? Miss Ferkel inquired frigidly. I sincerely hope not, Retief said. Part 3. Leaning back in Magnan's padded chair with power swivel and hip-u-matic contour, Retief leafed through a folder labelled CERP 7602BA Crony General. He paused at a page headed Industry. Still reading, he opened the desk drawer, took out the 2 bottles of Bacchus wine and 2 glasses. He poured an inch of wine into each and sipped the black wine meditatively. It would be a pity, he reflected, if anything should interfere with the production of such vintages. Half an hour later, he laid the folder aside, keyed the phone and put through a call to the Crony legation. He asked for the commercial attaché. "Retief here, Core HQ," he said airily. "About the medal shipment, the tractors. I'm wondering if there's been a slip-up. My records show we're shipping 500 units. That's correct, 500. Retief waited. Are you there, Retief? I'm still here, and I'm still wondering about the 500 tractors. It's perfectly in order. I thought it was all settled. Mr. Waffle, one unit would require a good-sized plant to handle its output, Retief said. Now Crony subsists on her fisheries. She has perhaps half a dozen pint-sized processing plants. Maybe in a bind they could handle the ore 10 WVs could scrape up, if Crony had any ore. It doesn't. By the way, isn't a WV a poor choice as a mining outfit? I should think, see here, Retief, why all this interest in a few surplus tractors? And in any event, what business is it of yours how we plan to use the equipment? That's an internal affair of my government. Mr. Waffle, I'm not Mr. Waffle. What are you going to do with the other 490 tractors? I understood the grant was to be with no strings attached. I know it's bad manners to ask questions. It's an old diplomatic tradition that any time you can get anybody to accept anything as a gift, you've scored points in the game. But if Crony has some scheme cooking... Nothing like that, Retief. It's a mere business transaction. What kind of business do you do with a Bolo WV? With or without a blade attached, it's what's known as a Continental Siege Unit. Great heavens, Retief, don't jump to conclusions. Would you have us branded as warmongers? Frankly, is this a clothesline? Certainly, you may speak freely. The tractors are for transshipment. We've gotten ourselves into a difficult situation, balance of payments-wise. This is an accommodation to a group with which we have rather strong business ties. I understand you hold a mortgage on the best land on Lovenbroy, Retief said. Any connection? Why, no. Of course not. Haha. Who gets the tractors eventually? Retief, this is unwarranted interference. Who gets them? They happen to be going to Lovenbroy, but I scarcely see... And who's the friend you're helping out with an unauthorized transshipment of grant material? Why, I've been working with a Mr. Gulver, a Bogan representative. And when will they be shipped? Why, they went out a week ago. They'll be halfway there by now. But look here, Retief, this isn't what you're thinking. How do you know what I'm thinking? I don't know myself. Retief rang off, buzzed the secretary. Miss Ferkel, I'd like to be notified immediately of any new applications that might come in from the Bogan consulate for placement of students. Well, it happens by coincidence that I have an application here now. Mr. Gulver of the consulate brought it in. Is Mr. Gulver in the office? I'd like to see him. I'll ask him if he has time. Great, thanks. It was half a minute before a thick-necked, red-faced man in a tight hat walked in. He wore an old-fashioned suit, a drab shirt, shiny shoes with round toes, and an ill-tempered expression. What is it you wish? He barked. I understood in my discussions with the other, civilian, there'd be no further need for these irritating conferences. I've just learned you're placing more students abroad, Mr. Gulver. How many this time? 2,000. And where will they be going? Crony. It's all in the application form I've handed in. Your job is to provide transportation. Will there be any other students embarking this season? Why, perhaps. That's Bogue's business. Gulver looked at Retief with pursed lips. As a matter of fact, we had in mind dispatching another 2,000 to Featherweight. Another underpopulated world, and in the same cluster, I believe, Retief said. Your people must be unusually interested in that region of space. If that's all you wanted to know, I'll be on my way. I have matters of importance to see to. After Gulver left, Retief called Miss Ferkel in. I'd like to have a breakout of all the student movements that have been planned under the present programme, he said. And see if you can get a summary of what Medal has been shipping lately. Miss Ferkel compressed her lips. If Mr. Magnan were here, I'm sure he wouldn't dream of interfering in the work of other departments. I overheard your conversation with the gentleman from the Crony legation. The lists, Miss Ferkel. I'm not accustomed, Miss Ferkel said, to intruding in matters outside our interest cluster. That's worse than listening in on phone conversations, eh? But never mind. I need the information, Miss Ferkel. Loyalty to my chief, loyalty to your paycheck should send you scuttling for the material I've asked for, Retief said. I'm taking full responsibility. Now scat. The buzzer sounded. Retief flipped a key. Muddle, Retief speaking. Arapoulos's brown face appeared on the desk screen. How do, Retief? Okay if I come up? Sure, Hank. I want to talk to you. In the office, Arapoulos took a chair. Sorry if I'm rushing you, Retief, he said, but have you got anything for me? Retief waved at the wine bottles. What do you know about Crony? Crony? Not much of a place. Mostly ocean. All right if you like fish, I guess. We import our seafood from there. Nice prawns in monsoon time, over a foot long. You on good terms with them? Sure, I guess so. Of course, they're pretty thick with Bogue. So? Didn't I tell you, Bogue was the bunch that tried to take us over here a dozen years back. They'd have made it too if they hadn't had a lot of bad luck. Their armour went in the drink, and without armour, they're easy game. Miss Ferkle buzzed. I have your lists, she said shortly. Bring them in, please. The secretary placed the papers on the desk. Arapoulos caught her eye and grinned. She sniffed and marched from the room. What that gal needs is a slippery time in the Great Mash, Arapoulos observed. Retief thumbed through the papers, pausing to read from time to time. He finished and looked at Arapoulos. How many men do you need for the harvest, Hank? Retief inquired. Arapoulos sniffed his wine glass and looked thoughtful. 100 would help, he said. 1,000 would be better. Cheers. What would you say to 2,000? 2,000? Retief, you're not fooling. I hope not. He picked up the phone, called the Port Authority, asked for the dispatch clerk. Hello, Jim. Say, I have a favour to ask of you. You know that contingent of Bogan students? They're travelling aboard the 2 CDT transports. I'm interested in the baggage that goes with the students. Has it arrived yet? Okay, I'll wait. Jim came back to the phone. Yeah, Retief, it's here. Just arrived. But there's a funny thing. It's not consigned to Deland. It's ticketed clear through to Lovenbroy. Listen, Jim, Retief said. I want you to go over to the warehouse and take a look at that baggage for me. Retief waited while the dispatch clerk carried out the errand. The level in the 2 bottles had gone down an inch when Jim returned to the phone. Hey, I took a look at that baggage, Retief. Something funny going on. Guns, 2mm needlers, Mark 12 hand blasters, power pistols. It's okay, Jim, nothing to worry about. Just a mix-up. Now, Jim, I'm going to ask you to do something more for me. I'm covering for a friend. It seems he slipped up. I wouldn't want word to get out, you understand? I'll send along a written change order in the morning that will cover you officially. Meanwhile, here's what I want you to do. Retief gave instructions, then rang off and turned to Arapoulos. As soon as I get off a couple of TWXs, I think we'd better get down to the port, Hank. I think I'd like to see the students off personally. Part 4. Karsh met Retief as he entered the departures enclosure at the port. What's going on here? He demanded. There's some funny business with my baggage consignment. They won't let me see it. I've got a feeling it's not being loaded. You'd better hurry, Mr. Karsh, Retief said. You're scheduled to blast off in less than an hour. Are the students all loaded? Yes, blast you. What about my baggage? Those vessels aren't moving without it. No need to get so upset about a few toothbrushes, is there, Mr. Karsh? Retief said blandly. Still, if you're worried, he turned to Arapoulos. Hank, why don't you walk Mr. Karsh over to the warehouse and, take care of him? I know just how to handle it, Arapoulos said. The dispatch clerk came up to Retief. I caught the tractor equipment, he said. Funny kind of mistake, but it's okay now. They're being offloaded at Deland. I talked to the traffic controller there. He said they weren't looking for any students. The labels got switched, Jim. The students go where the baggage was consigned. Too bad about the mistake, but the armaments office will have a man along in a little while to dispose of the guns. Keep an eye out for the luggage. No telling where it's got to. Here! A hoarse voice yelled. Retief turned. A dishevelled figure in a tight hat was crossing the enclosure, arms waving. Hi there, Mr. Gulver, Retief called. How's Bogue's business coming along? Piracy, Gulver blurted as he came up to Retief, puffing hard. You've got a hand in this, I don't doubt. Where's that Magnum fellow? What seems to be the problem? Retief said. Hold those transports. I've just been notified that the baggage shipment has been impounded. I'll remind you that shipment enjoys diplomatic free entry. Who told you it was impounded? Never mind, I have my sources. 2 tall men buttoned into grey tunics came up. Are you Mr. Retief of CDT? One said. That's right. What about my baggage? Gulver cut in. And I'm warning you, if those ships lift without... These gentlemen are from the Armaments Control Commission, Retief said. Would you like to come along and claim your baggage, Mr. Gulver? From where? Gulver turned 2 shades redder about the ears. Armaments? The only shipment I've held up seems to be somebody's arsenal, Retief said. Now, if you claim this is your baggage... Why, impossible, Gulver said in a strained voice. Armaments? Ridiculous. There's been an error. At the baggage warehouse, Gulver looked glumly at the opened cases of guns. No, of course not, he said dully. Not my baggage. Not my baggage at all. Arapoulos appeared, supporting the stumbling figure of Mr. Karsh. What's this? Gulliver spluttered. Gosh, what happened? He had a little fall. He'll be okay, Arapoulos said. You'd better help him to the ship, Retief said. It's ready to lift. We wouldn't want him to miss it. Leave him to me, Gulliver snapped, his eyes slashing at Karsh. I'll see he's dealt with. I couldn't think of it, Retief said. He's a guest of the Corps, you know. We'll see him safely aboard. Gulliver turned, signalled frantically. 3 heavy-set men in identical drab suits detached themselves from the wall, crossed to the group. Take this man, Gulliver snapped, indicating Karsh, who looked at him dazedly, reached up to rub his head. We take our hospitality seriously, Retief said. We'll see him aboard the vessel. Gulliver opened his mouth. I know you feel bad about finding guns instead of schoolbooks in your luggage, Retief said, looking Gulliver in the eye. You'll be busy straightening out the details of the mix-up. You'll want to avoid further complications. Yes, Gulliver said. He appeared unhappy. Arapoulos went on to the passenger conveyor, turned to wave. Your man, he's going too? Gulliver blurted. He's not our man, properly speaking, Retief said. He lives on Lovenbroy. Lovenbroy? Gulliver choked. But I know you said the students were bound for Deland, Retief said, but I guess that was just another aspect of the general confusion. The course plugged into the navigators was to Lovenbroy. You'll be glad to know they're still headed there, even without the baggage. Perhaps, Gulliver said grimly. Perhaps they'll manage without it. By the way, Retief said, there was another funny mix-up. There were some tractors, for industrial use you'll recall. I believe you cooperated with Crony in arranging the Grant 3 medal. They were erroneously consigned to Lovenbroy, a purely agricultural world. I saved you some embarrassment, I trust, Mr. Gulliver, by arranging to have them offloaded at Deland. Deland? You've put the CSUs in the hands of Bogue's bitterest enemies. But they're only tractors, Mr. Gulliver. Peaceful devices. Isn't that correct? That's correct, Gulliver sagged. Then he snapped erect. Hold the ships, he yelled. I'm cancelling the student exchange. His voice was drowned by the rumble as the first of the monster transports rose from the launch pit, followed a moment later by the second. Retief watched them out of sight, then turned to Gulliver. They're off, he said. Let's hope they get a liberal education. Part 5. Retief lay on his back in deep grass by a stream, eating grapes. A tall figure appeared on the knoll above him and waved. Retief! Hank Arapoulos bounded down the slope and embraced Retief, slapping him on the back. I heard you were here, and I've got news for you. You won the final day's picking competition. Over 200 bushels. That's a record. Let's get on over to the garden. Sounds like the celebration's about to start. In the flower-crowded park among the stripped vines, Retief and Arapoulos made their way to a laden table under the lanterns. A tall girl dressed in loose white and with long golden hair came up to Arapoulos. Delinda, this is Retief, today's winner, and he's also the fellow that got those workers for us. Delinda smiled at Retief. I've heard about you, Mr. Retief. We weren't sure about the boys at first. 2,000 bogans and all confused about their baggage that went astray. But they seem to like the picking. She smiled again. That's not all. Our gals like the boys, Hank said. Even bogans aren't so bad, minus their irons. A lot of them will be staying on. But how come you didn't tell me you were coming, Retief? I'd have laid on some kind of big welcome. I liked the welcome I got, and I didn't have much notice. Mr. Magnan was a little upset when he got back. It seems I exceeded my authority. Arapoulos laughed. I had a feeling you were wheeling pretty free, Retief. I hope you didn't get into any trouble over it. No trouble, Retief said. A few people were a little unhappy with me. It seems I'm not ready for important assignments at departmental level. I was shipped off here to the boondocks to get a little more experience. Delinda, look after Retief, said Arapoulos. I'll see you later. I've got to see to the wine judging. He disappeared in the crowd. Congratulations on winning the day, said Delinda. I noticed you at work. You were wonderful. I'm glad you're going to have the prize. Thanks. I noticed you too, flitting around in that white nightie of yours. But why weren't you picking grapes with the rest of us? I had a special assignment. Too bad. You should have had a chance at the prize. Delinda took Retief's hand. I wouldn't have anyway, she said. I'm the prize. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the story, hit the like button and subscribe for more. And if you'd like to listen to me narrating full novels, get ad-free and audio versions of the stories, and support the channel, subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/storiesfromthesky_SFF. For your next story, why not check out Bad Memory by Patrick Fahy, which you can find on screen now.